Good afternoon, good morning to some of you who are following us from the East or even West Coast in US. So I would like to welcome you all for this online talk series organized by Atlantic Council of Montenegro, where today we are focusing on an issue which is of great actuality and which is related with Western Balkans security challenges in a digital world. Today we are having a panel of distinguished experts who will be with us and who will be sharing their insights on this issue, sharing with us their experiences and the best practices. So we will be talking about the issues related with new digital ICT technologies and how and what are the implications of their implementation on security and stability, particularly having in mind the situation in Western Balkans. It's not necessary to specifically talk about the importance of such a topic we are having for our panel today, having in mind how important it is, everything which comes out of the implementation of new ICT technologies. Actually, it's few technologies that has enabled such a huge impact and such a huge changes in all aspects of our life. Here in Western Balkans, of course, we are in a specific moment when we are trying to somehow narrow the gap which is existing between our region and the rest of Europe and some of the Western world when it comes to digital transformation as such. As in other parts of the world here as well, we are having a number of partnerships with our allies, with the international organizations. European Union is active here, NATO is also active here, particular partners as well. But what could be noticed is that, of course, as probably the first step in everything, the focus is mainly on what technologies and the whole digital transformation can do when it comes to the development, economical development in the first place. So there, European Union is particularly active through the regional council in RCC in Sarajevo, where they are having a number of issues which are related with, I would say, creating a trustworthy digital space in the region of Western Balkans. However, and there has been a number of events starting from digital summits, a number of good initiatives, while, for example, free roaming for the region and the things like that. But if you look closely on everything, what you might notice is that we are somehow missing an important aspect of the whole story, which is the aspect related with impact of technologies on stability and security. That is something that has been treated quite, I would say, a lot nowadays, specifically after everything happened with the actual pandemic. Actually, COVID-19 and the pandemic we are living on is something which, as much as it has been creating all these problems we are having, on the other side, served as a kind of catalysts when it comes to digital transformation, enabling to many segments of our societies to become aware how important digital technologies are and how important it is to stay connected. Through that connections, we did have a number of new applications, services, but what has been even more pronounced this time was the fact how important it is to link all these issues with security and stability. It's not only about cyber attacks as such, it's about a number of issues which are related with offering all these digital services. In the region, we are mainly focused on what is disinformation, and all kind of things from that basket, I would say, of malicious cyber activities. The fact that our industry is so far from being digital transformed, and it's so far from living industry 4.0, probably is making us a little bit less aware of either and different malicious attacks that would be possible, which are mainly in other worlds, something which is related with getting new profits to those actors, whether they are non-state or state actors. But on the other side, what is more worrisome is that they are actually targeting security and stability of certain segments or the whole societies. So I think that we are, from the point of a timeline, at the right moment to do the necessary in building the right environment for, first of all, prevention of such kind of malicious activities, and for deterrence as such, because prevention and deterrence are two main components, I would say, we could be using in building up awareness, resilience, and the right measures that could be implemented. From that point, it is very important to build the right partnerships, to build alliances, and in these partnerships and alliances, to share what are the best practices, what are the best approaches in doing the necessary. There is a number of international initiatives, starting from UN, coming to EU, OSCE, NATO, where certain, I would say, frameworks have been already formed and could be used also for the region of Western Balkans. And since all these partnerships should necessarily be of a kind to include all different stakeholders. These days we are talking much about this multi-stakeholder approach, but that is something which shouldn't be limited to our narrative. It should be put into operation, and here in Western Balkans there are different segments of this ecosystem, I would say, that could be proactive and could be facilitating the whole process. When I say that I mean civil society, that I am also thinking about academia, about technical professionals. And what we do need to do is to make those regional links, of course, more strong, and to try to have a kind of an approach which could be effective, as I said, in preventing, in deterrence as such, for the region as a whole. Following what has been stated in all these multilateral initiatives, I do believe that the focus should be on a number of issues, starting from what should be a kind of inventory of existing and emerging threats. Then what should be related with the way how international laws apply to the use of ICTs, including norms, roles, and principles of responsible behavior of different states. Of course, confidence building measures are very important, especially in this region, capacity building as such, and these are all, I would say, axes of these actions that should be taken into account. Now, it doesn't matter that, or maybe it facilitates a little bit that kind of a process, the fact that a number of countries here in the region already are having their national strategies. But what we are lacking here is a kind of a coordinated activities that could be related with what is happening in EU, in US, and in that kind, since these kind of activities are having no borders, to be able to have a kind of approach which should be much more effective. So as everyone and each of you are having positions or have positions that were quite, I would say, closely related what might be the target of this online talk, I would like to offer you an opportunity to speak and offer an opportunity to us to share with you what your experiences and your insight in what might be effective here would be. That's said, I would like first to call Mr. Damir Mahrezvich, who is a senior fellow at the Europe Center at Atlantic Council in Washington, to take the floor, and knowing that Damir is one who was at the core of the Balkan Forward initiative of Atlantic Council, to share with us and that he's someone who recently been here in the region, as far as I noticed, to share with us what would be his take on the topic of today. Yes, Damir, please.
Thank you very much, Milica, and thanks to the Atlantic Council of Montenegro. I'm still in the region, actually. I'm dialing in from Tirana, actually, and I just hopped in a car and rushed to make it in time from the Open Balkan Summit that was just ending earlier today. We have a really excellent panel here who are, I think, very much specialists in the field. I'm more of a regional specialist. We at the Atlantic Council have pioneered, and one of our centers, DFR Lab, has really spent a lot of time working on a lot of these issues. But I'd like to maybe use my sort of opening remarks here to even maybe problematize some of the stuff that Milica said and sort of give us even more things to chew over in our conversation. And maybe, in sort of security and stability paradigm that you set out, maybe talk a little bit more about the stability side rather than the security side. I would say that, the challenges to democracy from technology have, certainly in the last 5 years in the United States is, we've been looking abroad for malign foreign influence and sort of looking at that as the sort of nexus of how we approach and think about these things. And like I mentioned, the DFR Lab has done a lot of work on this, and tracking this sort of stuff, trying to build resilience in societies, and really thinking and talking through a lot of these things. But I think one of the I wouldn't say unanticipated. I think some of us anticipated this, but one of the things that emerges from this field of work, the more time goes on, is what overwhelming amount of misinformation and disinformation actually is homegrown in a lot of these societies. It comes from within the societies themselves. You don't have to be talking about the Western Balkans. You can see it very much within the United States right now, with how politics are working and how social media is operating in that, how the medium itself shapes the message. And as you said yourself, COVID has exacerbated these trends, but not just in the ways of adopting technology, like you said, which I think is profound. And in fact, I think there is no going back. I think we've all been transformed by this experience. Our lives and our societies have been transformed by COVID. But I just want to highlight that as democratic citizens, we've also never been as isolated as before. And, we can sit in a Zoom call like this and look at each other's faces and, take questions from a crowd. But having just been at a live conference, it's quite different. And again, just speaking as a citizen of a democracy, I think that spending all of our times, even now as we face another wave of COVID coming after us, the prospect of living our lives more online like this, there are costs to it. There are these epistemological bubbles that we all enter in as people, this kind of epistemic closure and citizenship that has been the product of basically our social media age. And the more time we spend on it, I think it's quite obvious that our online life is actually exacerbating and making our democracies worse. I think ultimately, from a U.S. perspective, we have had the luxury to point to our former president and say that he is the source of so many of the sort of political ills and partisanship that has happened. But we see now afterwards that in fact, I think something else is at play, and there's something about technology and its interaction with democracy, which is problematic, let's say. Just want to add as well, the other part of the COVID impact on all of us is that having allowed technologies into our homes, one of the again, remarked upon, but perhaps not popularly remarked upon enough side effects of this is that we have turned on the data harvesting spigots to a degree that is hard to appreciate. The more time we spend online, the more stuff is known about us. And again, without being too doom and gloom about it, and especially in the United States, where you have private sectors and you do have laws about regulating these sorts of things, still the capacity for a kind of imbalance in a democratic society between states and the governed, I think, looms ever larger the more data gets harvested. So, having said all that, where does this leave us? And where would I sort of end my remarks? I think we need to move slowly in this time of everything ever accelerating. We need to take stock of what's happening, and I think a lot is happening. It's very difficult to do when we're in medias res like we are right now, and things are changing. Our means of interacting with each other are changing. Entire concept of what politics are and should be are changing at such a breakneck pace. I think that as we sort of try and take stock of what's happening, and we try and take a slower approach to our world, I think we just need to remember that we're human beings, and sort of come back to the idea of the human. More of a humanistic approach. I mean, when we talk about civil society, for example, in the democratic context, now it's sort of shorthand for NGOs and organizations that do this. But civil society in the democratic context is in fact human to human contact, and it is building relationships between people, not just networks, not social networks, not just contacts like this in this disembodied sort of way, but actually repeating and building a social fabric basically within a society. How that's done internationally, that's a bigger question. So to return back to the topic of the Balkans, like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm here in Tirana for the Open Balkan Summit. What to say? Digital was not explicitly on the agenda this time. It was partially in Belgrade, and we at the Atlantic Council helped convene basically CEOs from tech companies from all 6 countries in the region to come talk about basically connectivity and prospects for that. One of the CEOs memorably said something along the lines of, for all of us, and they all knew each other from all these top companies in the region. They said, for us and the coming generation, the Balkans are already open. We talk about open Balkan, whatever. And I think that's a profound and inspiring message. But that said, I do think a lot more effort needs to be spent thinking about what a lot of these evolving and quickly evolving technologies and mores have, what kind of effects they're having on our democracies such as they are. And to just be very careful as we move ahead, not to be techno-optimists about everything. This is difficult stuff at a very difficult time for democracies in the West more broadly. So just leave you with that as an opening remark, and look forward to the discussion with the rest of you. Mila, you're muted.
I didn't know you were around, so this time you might pop up in Montenegro as well. I mean, I know it's holidays time approaching, but still, there are interesting things happening here as well. So good to hear from you what that update on Open Balkans as well, and the place of digital there. Okay, let us, before coming to some more specific comments, to Laura Brent, who is Senior Fellow Technology and National Security Program at the Center for a New American Security. And Laura is on the West American coast, so sorry so much for causing you trouble with these time zones. Yes, please, Laura.
No, it's a pleasure to get to join. I mean, I look forward to also being able to travel in person. I've been to Montenegro once, so hopefully next time in person. So I will keep this brief, and sort of reacting to what we've heard, I would say I actually have some very unsatisfying answers. That these problems of technology and security in society are so complex, I would have a hard time offering this is the one approach. You know, having sat at NATO, having, you know, been in the US, what I have really seen be most successful is trying a lot of things. And how are you getting different organizations and different institutions to work together? So how is that working with international organizations, whether that's NATO, the EU, the UN, OSCE, what have you? That is bilateral partnerships. I know the US in specific has worked with Montenegro a number of times now on cybersecurity issues, has had teams in country. You know, what is the domestic government responsibility, both at a national level and, you know, at more of a local level? What are private sector actors responsible for, whether they're specifically in security or specifically in technology, or frankly, just big enough in the market to get other technology and security companies to perhaps behave differently? And then, you know, what is the responsible of civil society, whether that's individuals or NGOs, as we were just hearing about? And when I think about all of these different actors, though, I think that there is a desire often, I think a very fair one, to have clear rules, clear regulation, clear policy. You know, as Damir was just talking about, technology has changed certainly much quicker than government. But I think the pace of technology change will continue to increase, while governments, even if they get faster, may continue to fall behind, you know, in terms of specific regulatory action. So how do we really deal with that? I mean, I think that there is, even as we're trying to solve the more directive side of the equation, perhaps, there has been a lot of success on more voluntary partnership kind of models. So how is this, you know, whether that's the government working with the private sector or international organizations working with individual allies? You know, having looked at NATO, there is, of course, formal defense planning processes, but then there are also many other tools that are at the request of an ally, or NATO serving as a forum for multilateral cooperation. So I think not discounting what both governments and private sector actors can do in the absence of clear rules. And then finally, you know, we were talking some about prevention and deterrence. And the last part of that equation that I think is quite important to think about is really sort of the resilience and response piece as well, is that there will absolutely continue to be challenges, to be issues, whether that's, you know, from a truly technical point of view or how that ultimately impacts society. So how do we think through exercising how to respond better, building relationships so that when issues happen, you know, it's as simple as having a phone number of whom to call, you know, so that there are, I'd say, both simple and harder steps to get better at any of these, but continuing to look broadly, continuing to think about prevention as well as response, and even as striving for perhaps clearer rules, regulations, policy standards, still continuing to do as much on a voluntary and partnership basis as possible. So I will leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, you stressed out a number of issues that are actually at the core of every kind of consideration when we are talking about things. Specifically, I like your point that there is no unique approach, and we all are aware of that very much. So now I will ask Milan Sekulowski, who is a Senior Regional Cybersecurity Advisor at the Center for Digital Acceleration, DAI, to take a floor. Milan, please let us hear what is your take on these issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of such a distinguished panel and to have the opportunity to share my views here. I just have to, before I start, just to make a point that all the views that I will be sharing are my own. I am here as DAI employee, but the stuff that I say may not necessarily reflect the official attitudes and opinions of my employer. And with that out of the way, You will hear a lot of echoes of what was said in the introductory remarks by all of you before me. I really like what Damir said, that we should take a step back and reflect a bit on what's going on and look a bit broader picture. And this is actually what I tried to do in the preparation for today's talk, to give it a bit of thought, you know, to zoom out a bit and to see, okay, what are maybe some fundamental issues, like an overarching advice that I could take out from my experience from working in the Western Balkans on security sector reforms, on cybersecurity issues, and offer here as food for thought and maybe some avenues for going forward. So, I mean, I may be stating the obvious, but obvious very often is easily missed out. And I feel that when we consider what are our policies and what are our responses on the increased digitalization, on the fact that everything has speed up or just became more obvious that it's speeding up with the COVID and the impact of COVID, is that the digitalization has brought a lot of good to us, and we're taking that on board. And the reason why it's brought us good was because in the center of digitalization, we have the internet. And the key features of internet are those that brought the benefits. So the first key feature of the internet is that it's global, that it's very interconnected. And now we have development opportunities from places we never thought we would have to the places we never thought we would see. Like, you know, selling a software company from my hometown, from poor south of Serbia, to Microsoft for $100 million. That's something that you could never imagine, or not so easily imagine some time ago. But now it's a new reality. So it's global and it's very decentralized. So you can access one place to another very, very easily. But this has also brought the redistribution or recentralization of power in our societies. The responsibilities and the possibilities have shifted in many ways. So this has brought the benefits, but this has also brought some new challenges to all of us. I mean, the way the good guys are connecting, bad guys are connecting as well. The very fact, and this is maybe again to address or to echo something that was brought up by Damir, the very fact that you can do something does not necessarily mean that you should do that, and that's a trap through which many fall. But what is more important in policy sense is that the centralization of power brought us the centralization of threat actors and distributed the traditional power constellations in the sense that states and the state apparatus are no longer the major threat to one nation's security, especially when you look at the cyber. And even when they are, the action against another state won't necessarily mean the start of a full-blown war. So you know, a state activity against a state activity in cyberspace does not necessarily mean a war in a classic sense. But it also does not necessarily mean that we are living in peace. We definitely are not living in cyber peace. So states and state security services can no longer guarantee the protection from major harm coming from cyberspace on their own. I mean, we can see this even in the US with all the resources and all the flexibility and efficiency of the government there. They still rely on private companies like Mandiant, like Microsoft, to ensure their cyber resilience. And this is something that is, of course, affecting the policymakers in our region. For them, it's also very easy to fall into the trap of just looking in the positives of the internet and the digitalizations that are bringing to our societies, and to disregard the negative, the potential negative consequences. And there are, in addition to the global complexities, the additional issues that are specific to our region here, to the Western Balkans, is that very often the governments here may feel that there's nothing they can do or nothing they should do, because the hardware, the software, the technologies, the people behind all those software and technologies are somewhere far away, far beyond the reach of any of our nation states and their institutions. But as Laura suggested, unless you try to deal with some of these issues. You don't know if it's possible, so you should try and improve. The regulatory frameworks are becoming increasingly important. Milica, you have mentioned at your introductory remarks some of the global forums, some of the measures of the numerous frameworks, not to mention the NIS directive and the EU's frameworks, which we are still trying to catch up with. So even when the government wholeheartedly decides to follow the best practice or some prescribed EU or NATO standards, we are still challenged by the fact that we are overall establishing good governance in our societies. So, you know, in the wider sense. And even when we do that successfully, even when we manage to align our laws, even when we manage to try, and there are attempts, of course, in the region to do something, to implement some strategies, laws, etc. Even when we do that, we still challenge one more fundamental fundamental problem, which is the lack of capacities. And this lack of capacities is best seen in the lack of cybersecurity experts, or even the potential experts. They are a scarce resource and on high demand worldwide, and the benefit of internet of being able to connect people worldwide is making it much easier for such experts to go out of our region where they're also needed. So my key suggestions or things that I would like us to maybe try to unpack in our deliberations today is how can we make sure that the digitalization policies in our region, the modernization policies relying on the digitalization are safe by design, just like you should have a software or hardware being built to be safe by design, to be safe from the outset. This next question that I would like to pose is how can we make sure that the cybersecurity policy making and institutional capacity building is truly inclusive in both policy making and the implementation, to go beyond, as you have mentioned, beyond statements in strategic plans, but to go into actual practices of actually doing that, of consulting and implementing together across the sectors and stakeholders. And then the third point and the final point that I would like to raise is that we should actually look for a way to acknowledge that privacy and security go hand in hand in cybersecurity, and that we have to, as do human rights and security in general, and we have to make sure that we project the values that our societies stand for, or that our societies aim for in everything that we do digitally or analogous. So I will stop here. And I look forward to these discussions later.
Thank you, Milan, and thank you specifically for this last part where you put these questions, which are really very helpful in putting together the whole, I would say, framework of these discussions. Let us go to Irina Rizmal now, who is Senior Associate, Cybersecurity Policies and Risk Assurance Solutions and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Yes, Irina, you are coming from different sectors, so you might be the one who is adding to this multi-stakeholder approach we are having in this online talk with your specific experiences and insight on these issues. Yes, please.
Thank you, Milica, and thank you everyone for having me. It's always difficult to be the final opening speaker because you don't want to repeat what everyone already just said. But like you said, I will try to add just more spice to our discussion today and actually tag along on something that Milan mentioned, and it's the process of digitalization, which was ongoing in the region already prior to the pandemic, but has been incredibly pushed by the consequences of COVID. And my key concern here is that digitalization is not always understood as having cybersecurity as part of it. We are focused on opening databases, on creating processes, creating a number of e-services, but Milan already mentioned security by design, and I'm worried that not all of these services do take this into consideration when developing these platforms. And interesting, before I moved to PwC, I worked in a number of organizations, and we cooperated with different donors. And because one of the focuses is what the EU, US, UK, and other partner countries could do to help. It's interesting that a couple of years ago, cybersecurity was not on their radar. Also, they were really supportive of different capacity building processes and the process of digitalization. But when you mentioned cyber to them, it just didn't ring a bell until a couple of years ago when support really started pouring in, but mainly focused on capacity building, at least up until now. And I think this kind of lack of awareness, if I can call it like that, isn't just a characteristic of states and in terms of the national level. I think private sector entities are also sometimes aware that it exists somewhere, but still use the narrative of, it's not going to happen to me. Because it's difficult to justify budgets against a threat that you can't see. It's not tangible, and until it happens to you, you don't feel what the consequences of it might be. So to add in some private sector insights, PwC does a global CEO survey every year, and I think last year, across all the regions, cybersecurity was recognized as among the 5 top threats to businesses, apart from Central and Eastern Europe, where I think it was among the first 10, but maybe even lower on this list. And to go back to the point of if the states can no longer guarantee protection to the different stakeholders and groups within society, then what is the answer? And I think one of the directions that we should be thinking of is just building up basic cybersecurity awareness amongst each and every individual in society in whatever social role this person plays, whether this is a civil servant, whether it's a private sector employee, whether it's a civil society organization member, or a teacher, or a mother, or a grandfather, regardless of the social role they play. If they are all aware, at least, of the basic risks that are out there, they might be more resilient by themselves, and therefore support greater national resilience as well.
Thank you, Irina. So what I would like to take out from what all of you said is that actually that is something also my experience is as I'm having quite a lot, I would say, occasions and experience as well in trying to move this agenda here in Western Balkans, is that we are lacking what could be considered as real, I would say, intention to work together on putting together a kind of approach that wouldn't be unique, as Laura said, as it has been proved that there is no unique approach when you're talking about these things. What is specific here is the fact that the threats we are encountering are quite limited because of this, I would say, underdeveloped digitalization in what is the real industry as such, or infrastructure, because infrastructure is far from being digitalized, and whatever infrastructure we are talking about, whether it is the infrastructure which is related with transport, with electricity, with health, there is no that much of a threat at this level of development. But as these developments are coming very fast, I do believe that raising awareness as a first phase at this very moment would be very important, because that would be very useful and helpful when deciding the way how these developments will go further on. Now, from the point of disinformation and I would say jeopardizing through disinformation our human rights, we are having a number of examples that it's happening quite a lot in the region. And that is where I would say our environment, in the sense of protecting our human rights and our freedoms, is also underdeveloped. That is of a great concern, because what we are having in a public narrative, due to all these extensive use of social networks, media, online tools, is that people are threatened, people are having all kinds of very awkward situations, and the response from the other side of the state and of the institutions in protecting those who are subject to those attacks is not the right one, in the sense to discourage the further development of such kind of a behavior. And that could be very great problem here, having in mind the situation with all these relations in the region, with the overall level of stability and security. On the other side, we are all aware of the fact that different multinational and multilateral forums are trying to set together a kind of rules and norms that should be followed in these and different situations. I don't know whether you are aware of the work UN is doing lately. I've been there, and that new open-ended working group on the impact ICTs are having on international security was a good move, and was a kind of a historical move in UN, because that was for the first time, I would say, in the history of UN, that we did have really that multi-stakeholder approach, where different people from different sectors were able to contribute towards what would be the complete set of measures applied in this cyberspace. However, as everything in this situation with the current geostrategical relations, that is a very tough and difficult work, but still it's good that that work is in progress. So discussions might be very useful from that point, but what might be taken out of everything for this region specifically, having in mind all the relations, that recent history and everything, is that apart from raising awareness, maybe in this phase, more activities towards confidence building should be put forward. As Damir said, when it comes to technical professionals, I think there is no issue there. They are all very well connected. Our networks, physical networks as such, are very well developed. They are cooperating, they are working together, no matter whether it's telecoms operator, internet providers, us people who are in academia working on these issues, engineers, we are very well connected. But then you come to those where actually all these policies should be put together. And that is where we are having a kind of a bottleneck. Whether confidence and the trust between them is an issue, whether that could be resolved with these strategical and I will say regional initiatives like Open Balkans or some other, I'm not sure. But that is where I believe we should put more effort and try all these different parallel approaches, formal and also informal, so that we could be in communication, we could be sharing what are our positions, what are our experiences. There have been a number of such a positive signs when, for example, comes to those CIRTs in the region who are all very open, computer incident response teams who are very open between themselves to share to do the training jointly. So that is a kind of a thing where you could see some kind of first steps in building that confidence in the region as such, and broader than the region. So these are the things I could say from whatever part we are coming from, whether it's civil society, whether it's academia. We could push this agenda a little bit forward towards the governments, because it's governments who are at the end making what is necessary for the implementation and further on. So from that point on, Damir, I would really like to hear you. Do you think that this Open Balkan initiative, which is very limited at the moment, I got to say here from Montenegro, might be having any kind of positive impact on these issues we are talking about today?
Well, so let me say, congratulations to all my panelists, all of my colleagues on the panel. Really good food for thought. Something Irina said there about governments being incapable of providing a certain kind of level of security in the emerging world. And the importance that therefore of sort of, pushing this down, this kind of awareness onto people on the security level. I don't want to sound utopian on these sorts of things, because, that's always a temptation, especially when talking about tech stuff. But I do think that the work we need to be doing is on the level of society to make democracies functional, with governments as much as possible facilitating, but getting out of the way on a lot of this stuff. So basically, to answer your direct question, Milica, I actually, initiatives like Open Balkan or the Common Regional Market that, grew out of the Berlin process here in the Balkans, I think these are potentially facilitating to a better kind of, broader regional society that I think needs to rise up to basically address a lot of these problems. As we sort of grapple with this, not to take us too far off the topic here, but, the challenge for the region, the Western Balkans, is so much its fragmentation. These are small countries with small populations, and, initiatives like the Common Regional Market and Open Balkan look at it in terms of investment. How do we bring the kind of investment to these small markets, and how do we unify it and help that? I think that the positive hope, I guess, would be that the kind of agreements that these end up representing are open enough, quite frankly, to allow individuals and societies to get to the kind of solutions. I say that cautiously, and acknowledging the fact that it opens up all sorts of other cans of worms on different levels. Basically, what I was saying in my remarks about the effects of technology on democracies, and especially in this part of the world where, at best, as you take a zoom out, and not even the Western Balkans 6, but even more broad, further wider than that, including the countries that are within the European Union right now. These are democracies still developing, to put it kindly, and so the challenges there really, I think, will end up falling on people, and we'll need to rely on people and businesses and civil society to actually get us to the good place for a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about right now. This is getting slightly out of my expertise lane, but it's something I've dabbled with, and I wrote an essay several years ago about this on when it pertains to the effects of social media on democracies and in general, and technology on democracies. Milan mentioned the importance of privacy, and that is very true. But I think one of the paradoxes at the heart of the internet as we know it right now is the need for privacy on the one hand, but then the deleterious effects of anonymity on the other. And how one squares that circle, I think, from a democratic perspective, is very difficult. my colleagues may know more about this, and they follow this stuff more closely and on a more technical level. But perhaps there's hope that as the internet itself develops and the blockchain plays a bigger role in how basically every aspect of the internet, including sort of social dimensions, are handled, we'll be able to strike a good balance between the right to privacy, which really is, I think, at the end of the day, an important right, a basic human right, let's even say, and still somehow managing to rein in the question of anonymity and how one actually gets accountability within the internet going forward. I think these are important issues. And of course, this doesn't even touch on these are all sort of, again, stability questions that I'm playing with here. It doesn't even begin to touch the deeper questions about cybersecurity and how one manages these kinds of challenges. I mean, I'll just end this by saying, as we watch what's happening between Russia and Ukraine right now, all these articles coming up, it seems like a mad dash to try and fortify Ukrainian society and Ukrainian infrastructure, quite frankly, from what is likely to be a first blast of proper element of cyber in what could be a hot war. Again, these are all very difficult questions that I think we're going to have to be figuring out in real time.
I agree fully, Damir. And from that point, as you said, this region is actually the point where definitely our democracies are still developing, and we would be needing quite period of time to say that they are stable as such. And unfortunately, these last couple of years, or I would say it started some 5-6 years ago, we are going backwards. We are actually having a kind of a situation where a lot of things we achieved and thought that were stabilized have shown up that it wasn't the case. So now we are struggling again with some basic principles of democracies, including human rights, not to mention inclusiveness as such. So from that point, maybe if the governments would be confident and aware enough, they would be able to recognize that it's the digital sphere that could be actually in the digital space as such used as a platform for overcoming many of these things. But in that case, you would be needing a really completely different approach and probably completely different people, because whatever technologies as such and cyberspace as such, it is virtual, but at the very end, it all comes to the people, no matter whether it's development, new solutions, or it is enabling security. It's again about the people. So that's why all these measures that could be related with capacity building and the involvement of all different actors in that aspect of the whole ecosystem would be even more important, I believe, from that point. Milan, I will ask you how you would comment on that kind of approach when it comes to what might be the common point of all of us today, to put these issues on a higher priority to everyone around.
So there's a lot to unpack here. So I hope I'll be able to answer the key question. So how to, if I understood you well, please correct me. So you're asking me, how could we make sure that the capacity building is put higher on the agenda of different stakeholders? So, okay, so there are several layers to this. Capacity building, I mean, I absolutely and fully agree with you. It's about people, and it's about people's networks, not only the technologies and technology networks. When it comes to responding, sharing information about vulnerabilities, about threats, it all comes down to people's trust, not about which technological platform we use to share information. So that's absolutely essential. And in my experience, so that this problem needs to be addressed on two levels. So one level is addressing the need of capacity building of current people dealing with the issues on a daily basis, ongoing. You've mentioned yourself, and I fully agree, and I have witnessed a lot of these developments, that the CSIRTs in the region are already among themselves sharing information, but they are all very much undercapacitated in all of our countries. They lack expert knowledge, they lack more people, so there's the need there to address some things urgently from the other places. There is also a looming, even more strategic need for capacity building, which is not just addressing, just giving this on-the-job knowledge and giving this on-the-job trainings and stuff, but there is a need. So all the countries in the region are now looking towards implementing the next NIS directive, although most of us still did not implement fully, as neither did the EU countries in most of the cases fully implement the previous NIS directive. But for example, one of the things that a lot of the countries are looking towards is building not just one national CSIRT, but also building additional sectoral CSIRTs, which would be at different places. And there's an issue. I mean, you can adopt a law which will prescribe that this is obligatory, that information sharing is obligatory, but then who will staff all these CSIRTs, especially if they're in the public sector? You have to have people, you have to have mechanisms to attract talent, to retain talent. So there's also a policy dimension to it, to add to the whole issue of problem. And it's not an easy task. And that's something where honestly, the external interventions, EU, NATO, US, and UK, and other countries who are willing and who are active in the region can and should help. How to best do that? First of all, I wrote down a couple of points actually that I would like, and I keep repeating, and you might have heard me saying this on other forums as well. I mean, to make sure that this support is coordinated. This is recognized also in September, EU International EU ISS, International Security Studies, Institute for Security Studies, has published a report where they describe 4 potential scenarios in terms of capacity building, depending on the level of investments and the level of coordination. And what I fear is that the most likely scenario in our region is what they've described as resource fragmentation, where you have high investment, but not sufficient coordination among donors. And you have these islands of capacities in some countries and some areas. Maybe in one country it would be defense area because the country is in NATO. In another country it might be more on the business side because the business sector is more developed. But then you don't have this overall resilience across societies, across the region, as you mentioned. So this is one of the things that I believe the donor community and those supporting the process should be very well aware of. The second issue that I already mentioned earlier was to take into account the policy and political context in the region. And I think this also reflects on some of the points that Damir made about making sure that, we have to be consistent in promoting democratic governance values. For example, building a national cybersecurity center in an intelligence service may be very efficient way, but in a political context when there's not enough accountability of intelligence service, that may not be the best course of action in a country A, B, or C. We should all take into account the absorption capacity. We can't train a couple of people in CSIRT every day. They have to actually do their job as well. So there is the issue of absorption capacity. There's the issue of defining the actual and tailoring the actual when addressing the long-term workforce development. But I said, when trying to build a workforce which will work in the sectoral CSIRTs or places like that in future, we have to start now to build stuff for the next couple of years. But even when we do that, we shouldn't do that generically. We should make sure that there is a loop between what are the actual needs in the industries and what are we developing in academia, in not just academia, but also technical trainings in private sector, etc. Yeah, my last note is, but I'm coming back to the first one now again, that network of trust are people-based, and we should never disregard this component and just rely on technology. But I won't go into that. I think this was elaborated more than enough. So I hope this is quite a wide answer, but I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that's true. It's wide because the whole topic is very wide, and it's actually encompassing so many aspects, and that's what we are talking about, while actually I believe that all of us are advocating what you said, this network of trust between the people and this human-centric approach when it comes to solutions we are talking about, including internet as well, which should be kept as open as it has been originated before, and it should be having this other dimension, which is actually to be human-centric in order to respond to all the things we are talking about. On that issue, Laura, you mentioned something that I fully endorse and which is actually related with the approach when it comes to treating these issues, which should be, as you said, trying it all. Do you, from that point, have any further suggestion how it should be put into implementation, not to have a kind of nightmare there with different actors doing different things? As Milan said, we're already having some of these around with the different donors which are not actually coordinating what they are doing around, and that is something we have seen before on other issues as well, and which is definitely making all this effectiveness a kind of a problematic issue at the end. Laura?
So I think that's a very fair question and also a hard one. I think it's fair to say there will never be perfect coordination, but I do think that, you know, there are some principles perhaps that we can think of when trying to harmonize approach. Thinking about the last few comments, I think one point that I really want to make is I think the focus on trying to treat cyberspace as real a space as any other is really important when we're thinking about any of these issues, that geopolitics still apply, that the way human interactions work still apply. Thinking about, you know, Damir had mentioned Ukraine, and in the public reporting that there's a lot of concern about what might be happening, but that's part of the concern about what Russia is doing. That doesn't make cyberspace unique. So I think trying to, you know, thinking about disinformation, that, you know, anonymity or trolls or any of that can be part of the problem, but thinking about the way networks share information, are they sharing it because they think it's a credible source, or are they sharing it because it aligns with their worldview and that's what they want to continue to push? I mean, I think that there are a lot of people engaging in, I would say, you know, potentially malicious behavior under real names. So when thinking about the implementation problem of trying to make efforts coherent, trying to get at these problems systemically, I do think viewing cyberspace as real space is sort of first and foremost really important in our approaches, and viewing it as core to our lives, not necessarily an enabler, that this is where we're, especially during the pandemic, making friends, having interactions, doing all of this. So treating it as equally real and important. I do think that one of the issues too that's come up repeatedly is really the appropriate roles between government and other actors. And, you know, I would like to see government perhaps play more of a coordinator role in terms of if there are bilateral, multilateral partnerships, if there are ways to take grants or set up programs around education and thinking about that more systemically. So I think government in particular has a role to try to make things as minimally duplicative as possible, and trying to view some of these challenges as either whole of society or, you know, really pipeline challenges when you talk about people or tech talent or any of those issues. So I think that there will continue to be gaps, but to, pick up on words Milan has said a number of times, it is about networks and developing networks of, human trust. So governments, I think, should play a deconfliction role. I do think that that's important in the context of viewing cyberspace as real and taking those concerns as seriously as any other. And then as we move out on any number of programs, government hopefully does deconflict, but as people build in more knowledge and more connections, that hopefully those networks as well can, help to make sure that these problems are addressed somewhat efficiently. And just to wrap up, I would say also, I think it's always important to think about what we think good looks like. Is what do we think good security looks like? What do we think good behavior in cyberspace looks like? Because I think we can often get very focused on what perfect looks like. So what is real and real progress that matters? Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. That is something we are trying to do from here, actually. Atlantic Council, as we've been having a leading role in many other initiatives, we are trying to actually make a kind of a platform where we would be able to establish a kind of a trustworthy network, people one, so that we could be pushing forward some of the things we've been talking about today. And there, Irina could help us with insights from the from the private sector. Sorry, because usually here in the region, private sector is there waiting for governments to have initiative to come with a certain contracts and go on a commercial basis. But I do believe that there is a kind of a room there for a different approach where private sector could be on the same side with civil sector, with academia, trying to push forward some of the issues which at the end will be in their benefits as well. So Irina, with your experience, do you have any certain, I would say, suggestion on the way how private sector here in the region could be more proactive in pushing this agenda forward, agenda which is not just digital transformation, but the agenda related with raising awareness of how security is important? As you said, we all agree, I would say, that these two terms are not really very well connected around.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I think we already have some good examples across the region of private sector engaging in different initiatives in different ways. So for example, in Serbia, there is this initiative called Digital Serbia, which has launched several educational programs and campaigns. And it's a conglomerate of different private sector actors that work together with the state. In Montenegro, I've been following the work of ICT Cortex as much as I could from online reports. And I must say that we are currently implementing a regional project where we were doing discussions with different representatives of both public sector, private sector, civil society, and the ICT Cortex as a cluster itself, but also its members have been very proactive in engaging with us for this report that we are working on. But in terms of private sector initiatives, I always like to give an example of banks. That's if at a general level, I mean, they work obviously on their own security and awareness raising of their own employees, but they also have both proactive and reactive communication with their clients in good examples. If there is, for example, an ongoing campaign that is targeting the country or the region, they will communicate with their clients, warning them of what they should be wary of. But also in terms of proactive communication, some banks send to their clients examples of what fake email would look like, explaining how they will always get in touch with their customers so they don't fall for some scam. And I think in this way they are kind of raising awareness amongst the more general public. But in Serbia also, the Association of Serbian Banks started with like an unofficial channel of communication, exchanging information and good practice on how they practice cybersecurity when they're within different banks. And they worked for a number of years towards building up a sectoral CERT, increasing their capacities and making this entity that is there to support all banks in Serbia now. And I think this kind of cooperation will be key in the future, because you can have as much capacities in public sector bodies and national certs as you want, but it will never be enough to follow all the different trends in all the existing sectors, from banking to healthcare, where you have a number of devices that are now connected in some way, and you'll never have enough specialists to follow all of these different types of technologies, ensuring their security. So I think sectoral capacity building is one of the key elements that we will need in the upcoming future.
Yeah, you are right. And the only way I would say to have the right response to these issues is to have a real partnerships and have a cooperation and coordination across the society. And everything we are talking about, different stakeholders, is that's why very, very crucial. And therefore, we should have at the national levels and then at the regional level a kind of platforms which will enable us to cooperate, to share the experiences and work together. Without that, I doubt we will be that effective. Anyway, we are well beyond the time that was set for this online talk. I would like to really say a big thank you to all of you who shared your time this afternoon or this morning with us. Thank you very much. I think it was very insightful. We here at the Atlantic Council, we make a summary of this talk, and we will be happy to share it with you. And of course, we will be happy to keep these connections for the future and to see how and where further on we could strengthen these discussions with very specific experiences you showed us and the knowledge you showed us today, and see whether and how we together could be more effective in preparing this region of Western Balkans for what is happening and what is going to happen, obviously, with all the development, but not only the development of technology or economy, but also all these developments we are having in social and political sectors, where, as you do know, Western Balkan is kind of a region where we are still having this, what has been characteristics for this region for centuries, which means we are at the crossroads of all these geopolitical tendencies. And what we are living right now at this moment is that we are definitely in this period where very high level of geopolitical competition is playing on, and everything which is happening in relations with big states like US, like Russia, like China is having its reflections here, and that is what is making everything much more complex and challenging. Anyway, on that note, hoping that we will be able to find the right responses and to build up our resilience on all these kinds of influences, I would like to conclude this online talk and to say again a big thank you to every one of you, and hope to see you again very soon. Thank you very much. Thank you.